Say what?
Hello and welcome back. It's time for Say What, where we hear from those connected to the industry about what's going on in our world of electrical apprenticeship. And of course, this includes those topics that you have suggested to us, so keep them coming. I'm your host, Cindy Sanderford, joined by Todd Stafford, the Executive Director of the Electrical Training Alliance. Get ready. We are in for a treat today because we are speaking with the team at the Cassandra Banks Foundation. They are working to build opportunities for Black women to excel in the industry. We are very excited to welcome Brennan, Drew, and Melanie. All right, Cassandra Banks team, let's talk about you. If you will, introduce yourselves, let us know who you are and a little bit about you.
I'd be happy to kick it off, and just want to say it's great to join you all today and have this conversation about the trade and diversity. My name is Brennan Banks. I'm the founder and vice president of the Cassandra Banks Foundation. I come to the foundation with 2 decades of humanitarian and philanthropic experience, really dedicating my career to work with communities to see how to best support them, specifically around emergency management, disaster management. Spent many years working in Africa with communities across the continent, working on ways to enhance community resilience. More recently, over the last 5 to 6 years, I've returned to the United States, where I'm working in the philanthropic area. And what that means is really working with private sector, community foundations, national foundations, and other philanthropic interests to help them be more effective in their support to communities and ensuring that they are also reaching out to underserved communities and other pockets of areas in the United States to have targeted, effective, and more efficient philanthropic outreach and support services.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, what do you even say? Like, it just, that's a hard
You
thing.
say thank you, and
Yeah.
I appreciate everything you do, what you say.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
thank you.
Thank you.
Agreed. Drew, you going to tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, I'd love to. So my name's Drew Souders. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, originally. Kind of jumped around over the course of my life, my career. Spent some time in Virginia, in DC, and then most recently just moved down to California. So living out here in San Diego. I actually met Brennan when we were deploying to the Caribbean together for the first time after Hurricane Irma. We met each other in Miami Airport in Florida on the way down to St. Martin to help run some hurricane recovery efforts. And then since that time, I've done a lot of work on the domestic social programming side of things. I do a lot of work in the workforce area, basically programs that help people to find jobs and to keep jobs, and with a specific focus on human-centered design, community engagement, and then increasing an equity focus, racial equity focus for those kinds of programs. So I actually started working with apprenticeship programs about 2 years ago in the Inland Empire region of California. There's a lot of buzz around apprenticeship across the country right now, as I'm sure a lot of you will know. There's a big movement from the current administration. There's kind of cross-aisle support for increasing apprenticeship opportunities across the country right now. And I think that bringing in an equity focus at the beginning, like this, is a really important component of this. Just excited to be here with CBF and supporting the effort.
Yeah, and thanks to you for the work you do. And it's incredible to hear the connection. You know, we didn't know each other, or we haven't known each other that long, I should say. Mm-hmm. And there's already a connection in the work that you do with apprenticeship and getting people to work. I mean, it's incredible how this all came about. Miss Melanie, tell us about you.
All right. I started my career in ad agencies. So I grew up in New York, but I went to Duke, so I fell in love with North Carolina. So I lived in North Carolina for the last 20 some odd years, but recently relocated to Tacoma, Washington. So started my career in ad agencies, big brands, Royal Caribbean, Pepsi, McDonald's. But I did a lot of volunteer work, almost 2 decades, with an organization that worked with people with HIV/AIDS. And that really was my pull to take my skills to the nonprofit sector. So I've worked in the nonprofit sector probably 15, 16 years now. Really did some intensive training around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I will say it wasn't driven, because I often had to frame it that way, that I didn't do it because I was a Black woman, but I did it from a business imperative, from a strategic standpoint, that the realities of diversity, equity, and inclusion in an organization are about programming, are about organizational structure, are about things like hiring practices and morale. So, when you're the communications person or the strategist, it's sort of that framing and how do you start looking toward the future. So that's why I'm excited to do this work. I guess I'm the third intersection of the work that we do together, and how complementary our skill sets are.
Well, that's
Yeah.
very exciting. With that talent, passion, and wisdom from experience that you gain out of this, we got a good group here. No
Right.
doubt.
Well, that's how I've had the privilege of obviously meeting with you all several times. Not in person yet. We're going to get there, but for now it's been Zoom, and I feel like every time we end the meeting, I feel like I've grown a little, like I've learned stuff, and I'm sure Todd feels the same. It just kind of feels like an honor to sit here with you all. The work that you're doing for humanity is huge, and then to know that it's crossing over into us, into what our industry is, and kind of thinking of that, it's the Cassandra Banks Foundation. So I would think the first thing we really probably make sure everybody knows is, who is Cassandra Banks, and what and why does this foundation bear her name?
Yeah, Cindy, well, thanks. I'll be happy to take that on. And I think I have that responsibility by starting off by saying Cassandra Banks is my mother. And as some of you or many of you know, as an African-American male in the United States, one thing that we love to talk about and to honor our mothers. And Cassandra Banks is a journeyman wireman with IBW. She is out of local 1579 in Augusta, Georgia. She has over 40 years of work in the trade under her belt. As we speak today, at this moment, literally, she is in Southern California, working out a local 440 outside of Blythe in the desert, where she's working to build next generation of solar power plants. And she's been focusing on that specific sector of the electrical trade for about 4 or 5 years now, between 440 and 357, I believe, out of Vegas. But my mom, as I mentioned earlier, is someone that I can speak to for hours and speak about for hours. Someone that has really inspired me to be who I am today. And Cindy, you're quick to acknowledge my background and the background of my colleagues. But speaking for myself, the reason why I decided to get into the field, nonprofit field, to help communities and help families, to uplift communities and families was because of my mom and her story. And her story goes back to 1979. Where as a young single mother, she realized that she was stuck in sort of a situation of poverty, living in Augusta, Georgia, literally on the other side of the tracks, working 2 jobs, while her and I lived in the back bedroom, of her mother's house, my grandmother. And she realized that she needed to make a change in her life. And in 1979, she walked into the IBW local 1579 hall in Augusta, Georgia, and said, I want to learn more about this apprenticeship program. What is this all about? She had been taking side jobs on various construction sites and, had learned about this apprenticeship program, this opportunity. So she walked into that office, which at that time, for a young Black woman was kind of heard of. At that time, it was still very much a white male dominated industry and local. But, my mother and her spirit, she said, I want to sign up. I want to do this. And let's get this started. And she entered the apprenticeship program that same year. She was the only woman in the class. She was the only Black trainee in her class. But despite all of those odds, she was able to graduate, complete the program, overcoming a long list of challenges. But she turned out in 1579, and as I said, continues to be an active journeyman in the IBW and electrical trade. And really, as a single Black mother at that time, the apprenticeship program was a viable opportunity or pathway to economic freedom. And it took, our family from poverty into the middle class, as we would say here in America. And because of that decision she made in 1979, despite the odds and the challenges that she faced, it enabled me to be the man I am today. It enabled me to decide to go on to college and get a degree and decide to move into the humanitarian nonprofit field and to see how I can help others. So, again, as African American male, my priority in life is to honor my mom. And in her case, it's really easy for me to honor her because of the hard work and sacrifices that she's made. But all of that was possible because of the electrical trade and for this opportunity through the apprenticeship. And just to piggyback on that, the foundation that's named after her, Cassandra Banks Foundation, we seek to harness her trailblazing spirit and really help more Black women discover these pathways to economic freedom and let them know that there are these viable apprenticeship programs that could really help them build a career and help them provide for their families in a very dignified manner. We want to help increase, the number of persons of color, specifically Black women, and help them enter into the apprenticeship program, secure placements in the program, and more importantly, graduate from these programs and move them into high-paying, skilled, and dignified work in the electrical trade industry. Our goal is really to see how we can connect Black women, with these programs. We want to make sure that they have the additional financial support and resources they need to overcome some of the unique challenges that they face when compared to maybe many of their white male colleagues in the program. We want to make sure that they have career advancement guidance and mentorship, which we've learned is really, really important to help women in the trade and specifically women of color complete their apprenticeship programs. And we also work with various stakeholders, such as the Electrical Training Alliance, trade groups, private sector, to provide consulting services to them so that they can also increase how they work with communities of color and how they enhance and strengthen their disaster equity, access, and inclusion needs and programs. And in conclusion, and ultimately, we seek to create positive, lasting change in communities of color, starting with one person, one family at a time, but allowing that to then be transformed into building generational wealth and helping them to strengthen generations to come in communities of color.
Yeah, it's gosh, there's so when I'm thinking of your mom and her trailblazing and just the story and how many lives, she's touched from that decision to walk in and make that application. And I'm a product of the industry. I'm a daughter of, I'm a niece of, I'm a cousin of, someone that went through this trade. And so I know how my life and my children and, are impacted by this. And so I love to hear this and then see how you're giving back.
Yeah, hearing the story is admirable, no matter who's going to tell the story, but hearing it from her background as well as yours, Brennan, relating that, has that much more power and wealth that we need to share. There's no doubt about it. So thank you for that very much.
Yeah. Okay, but before we're coming back, but you got to tell us, there is an incredible accomplishment that your mom's story has, and I'd like you to share that with us before we move on to talk a little bit more about the foundation.
Absolutely. I was able to sort of, give an overview of my mom's journey, through the trade and so forth, and our life and how it's been connected to those decisions she's made. But one fantastic and really interesting accomplishment that she's made as a result of her decision to enter into electrical trade was that in 2004, Cassandra Banks became the first Black woman to reach the geographic South Pole. I definitely want to note that it's widely credited that very accomplished explorer Barbara Hillary, at the age of 79, did reach the geographic South Pole in 2011. And that's been widely acknowledged by all major media markets. But my mom did it 7 years before her. But my mom didn't do it as an explorer. She definitely didn't do it seeking any type of attention, and was just something that we accepted within our family. But in 2004, she took her trade as electrician, applied for a job with a government contractor that basically runs the Geographic South Pole Research Station on behalf of the U.S. government. And literally her job took her to the geographic South Pole, again, in which she became the first Black woman to reach the geographic South Pole. And she spent nearly a year there, including a winter over, as they say, when basically you decide in fall, if you're going to commit and stay over through the winter months down there. I should say vice versa, because it's the Southern Hemisphere. Since in spring when they make that decision. Once you're there for the winter in the Southern Hemisphere and in South at the South Pole, there are no flights in and out for a maybe 3 to 5 month period. So she made the sacrifice, a commitment to stay there through their winter, taking the risk of being there without the possibility of being evacuated or access to medical services. But she, again, it's an exciting story because, again, it goes back to her decision in 1979 to join the electrical apprenticeship program and to become an electrician. It was her career that enabled her to achieve this accomplishment of being the first Black woman at the geographic South Pole in 2004. And we really want to use her story and her accomplishments to inspire other Black women and women of color to embark on pathways through apprenticeships and in the trade industry. And again, I think it's just a powerful story that it was her career that enabled her to make this accomplishment. And if my mother was able to do that starting in 1979 in Augusta, Georgia, I want to use her story to empower other women to realize that they have the opportunity to fulfill their dreams, both in terms of economic freedom, the ability to provide a dignified and stable livelihood for their children, for their family, and really build generational wealth as well, and provide a good future for their children. But that accomplishment in 2004 is something that's been documented, and it's her story that we really want to share with others to further inspire and motivate other women to be a new generation of Cassandra Bankses, and to be able to also embark on her journey using apprenticeship as a very strong, viable pathway to do so.
Yeah, you don't walk in and apply for apprenticeship and think, I'm also going to be the first Black woman at the South Pole.
Right.
You don't think that. So I think that's just such a great testament, regardless of who you are, where apprenticeship can take you. It is, I will say again, just limitless, the opportunities that are there. Melanie, we've talked a lot about the foundations, but I want to really hone in on the mission. What is the mission of CBF?
Well, Brennan certainly has touched on it in many ways. And what he will say is, I'm going to say it more succinctly, right? But it's always the bigness of his ideas that have driven this foundation. But I'm going to read it because, Cindy, you're a communications person. So, you play with the words and you want to get them just right. So indulge me for a minute because I'm going to read this. So our mission is to provide pathways to sustainable, well-paying, and gratifying livelihoods for Black women to pursue and young Black women to aim toward, in order to create economic engines that give individuals and communities of color the power to chart their own destinies for well-being, asset building, and success.
Wow.
Yeah, words are magical. And so, yes, choosing the right ones is so important. And I love that. I mean, it's a powerful statement that really does succinctly say what this foundation is doing for women of color all across the board? Because there's data to prove that sometimes the workplace can be the least diverse, and industries can be the least diverse because we tend to find out about jobs just through word of mouth or through our circle. And just unfortunately, a lot of our circles aren't very diverse. And so you just kind of start breeding and reproducing who you already are. And so I think being able to say, hey, here's a group of people who may not have been in the original circles that will benefit and go to the South Pole and be working, doing solar work in California and Vegas. And so again, just being able to watch you all pursue this and make it happen is amazing.
The mission statement has the passion behind it and has a vision as well, which was well said and well stated. So thank you for that.
Yes.
But then the excitement to see as far as the pathways that we can grow and where we can go from here, I'm excited about.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So Drew, what made you get involved with the foundation?
Yeah. So Brennan and I have stayed in touch since we first met. And over time, he started to tell me his story and Cassandra's story, and the opportunity that Cassandra was able to create for their family through apprenticeship and through taking this path. So obviously that's a hook, that's, you just heard it yourself. It's an amazing story. But honestly, it's bigger than that too. Once you start to dig in and learn a little bit about the history of apprenticeship in this country, and kind of like the macro forces that are at work right now, it's clear how much of an opportunity there is right now to improve Black women's lives and make an impact in communities of color through opportunities in apprenticeship. One of the key things for CBF, we're all about honoring history. And actually, if you go to our website, you can see there's a cool little timeline graphic that shows the history of apprenticeship in the US. And just, I won't go through the whole thing, but just a few things that you might not be aware of. Actually, back in, when you're looking at the history of apprenticeship, specifically through kind of the intersectional lens of being a Black woman in the United States, there's a few really key, like, pivotal moments in our history. One was obviously the National Apprenticeship Act back in 1937, which, was technically allowed everybody to be a part of an apprenticeship. But in practice, Jim Crow laws and other local discriminatory practices prevented people from actually joining, Black people and other people of color. That kind of changed in 1964 when the Civil Rights Act was able to provide some kinds of protections for people. But interesting to note, women still weren't allowed into apprenticeship until 1978, when Jimmy Carter signed an executive order. So Black women were excluded from, apprenticeship up until the year before Brennan's mom joined the industry. It's really interesting to look. She joined in 1979. So if you look at the impact of that legislation and that kind of anti-discrimination accountability mechanism that policy had, that's kind of the reason that we're here today. Is that executive order back in that day. So looking at the history, which obviously impacts everything that we do today, it was actually back in 79 that the rate for women's participation in apprenticeship went up to about 7%. And then back in 1980, Reagan kind of stripped some accountability mechanisms that allowed that number to keep going up. And we actually seen that apprenticeship has stayed around that 7% mark for women's participation for the last 4 decades, actually. So it's interesting to look at the history and then to look at where we're at now, where there's kind of this cross-aisle support for apprenticeship. There's the National Apprenticeship Act of 2021 coming down with some additional funding to support expansion into new industries, new sectors, including the electrical trades. So it's an exciting time to say, we've seen what's happened and we can imagine a new future.
Yeah, and Drew and I've had, as I've mentioned the opportunity, I've had opportunities to talk to this group a lot, and Drew's passion and his heart and commitment is just, it's tangible. And I've always appreciated that about our conversations. And I'm just, as you're talking, Drew, I'm thinking all because of a, encounter in a Miami airport. All of this comes back to you and Brennan meeting up. And I just think that is so, I love stuff like that. I eat it up. So those chance encounters or whatever you want to call them. But Melanie, you've talked about your work in the public, private sector, moving to nonprofit. How did you get involved with CBF?
Yeah, I realized I didn't mention how Brennan and I connected. So we worked for the Center for Disaster Philanthropy. The first time I heard Brennan, he was on a webinar, and I don't remember which island you were on, Brennan, but I thought, wow, he's pretty amazing. And then he came to work with us, and we just sort of developed that friendship and that rapport. And I just always loved you. You talked about passion, and so no one is more passionate than Brennan. So when he called me and said, hey, this is something I'm thinking about. This is my mom's story. What do you think? I was like, okay, I can do that. But I think I also saw it from a personal standpoint. As a Black woman, I experienced my own microaggressions in throughout my career, everything from being told I didn't have leadership skills to, a boss who told me with my very short haircut that, I was becoming more and more radical, to, things that were flat out discriminatory. So I understood, even though I did not have a background in the trades, I understood what that was like. And I understood the power and the value of advocacy and mentorship. So when Brennan talked about what he wanted to do and his vision, I was like, okay, sign me up.
I'm in. Yeah. Well, Brennan's voicemail, because he left it, I think it was on our customer service line, and it went to Todd, and then Todd sent it over to me. And I mean, you could feel it as this tangible, like Drew's, this tangible passion. And then I don't know, Brennan, I don't know how long we stayed on the phone that first day, but I thought, man, we got, I got to let this guy go, but I could, just talking and asking questions. So it's, what a great team you have. We at the ETA love to talk about our team, this group at this organization and the different skill sets. And when I look at you all, I see that magnified, just the three of you having these different skills and different interests and coming together to create something fabulous. And so I'm curious, in your minds, why do you think this work matters? And I know you've touched on it a little bit, but Drew, why does it matter to you?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, the inherent power of economic freedom, which has kind of eluded Black women and communities of color for generations, it's an integral part of a diverse workforce, making that diverse workforce more equitable and just more inclusive for everybody involved. Diversity brings so much power and difference in perspective to the workplace. It's been shown in studies that bringing a more diverse workforce is the way to go. So I think there's such a huge value add there. And then just looking at the current state. If you're looking at the numbers, women apprentices earn $14 per hour less than men on average currently. Black apprentices earn $12 per hour less than their white counterparts. You're talking about really big numbers. And then I talked about intersectionality. If you lay those two identities on top of each other, you can see how much of an impact that has for a Black woman in the industry. So it's in my mind, it's all about first and foremost, helping Black women find access to economic freedom through these paths. And I just think it's the right thing to do. There's just, everybody's going to benefit at the end of the day from taking this path.
And I want to, go ahead, Brennan. I'm sorry.
Sorry. I just wanted to add, and Drew really, touched on some really important points there, but at the end of the day, fundamentally, apprenticeship programs for Black women and other persons from communities of color, it's really given them, self-determination. And again, and I keep, repeating that, viable option for employment, and not requiring a college degree, but, being able to take someone and giving them this opportunity, this pathway to really strengthen their families' economic security and freedom, as well as supporting, the larger communities of color that they come from. And we've all been really motivated by 2020 and sort of this racial social awakening here in our country. And, we're really talking about building generational wealth. And I think, again, apprenticeship programs such as the Electrical Training Alliances programs across the country really provide that viable pathway and that opportunity to economic security and freedom.
Absolutely. And you mentioned money, and I know that, our listeners have, some of them may and some may not know, the beautiful thing about what IBW, NECA, ETA, the way this works, every apprentice is making the same amount. So gender, race, none of that matters. So if I'm a first period apprentice, I make this much money, you make that same amount. But where I know, and you all are very familiar, of course, with the IBW, NECA, ETA joint task force for DE&I, one thing we've been talking about a lot is, of course, like, okay, the money, yes, which is great, because we see that as a major problem across all industries. So we've got that part down, that everybody's getting paid the same. But what about the training? Whether that be on the job site, and that's one thing, it's like we want to make sure that everybody's getting trained the same and getting the same attention regardless of gender, skin color, and so forth. And so when Drew was mentioning that, I think, it's one thing that we can, if you want to even say brag upon, is like we know that we're paying everyone equal, but we still get back to, are we treating, are we admitting, and then we start going down that rabbit trail. But saying DE&I made me think of, you all add an A. So you do, and let me see if I can say this right, because I'm used to saying DEI, but you say DEAI. And so I'd love for you to share with us why that shows up when your organization is talking about this effort.
Sure. The A is for access. And so while the other three pillars of diversity, equity, and inclusion are absolutely vital, on historically excluded communities, access, there's a huge lack of access in everything from education to wealth building to job opportunities. So that's why we add the DEAI in our work. And we do have a diversity statement on our website, which I'm going to read again, just because again, it's the magic of the word. So I apologize. When you talk to a communications person, you want to just be sure we get it right on point. So anyway, so I just want to say, I want to include this because I think it's part of how we've talked about the specifics of it, but I also think it's the broader foundational principles of what we do and what we're looking to do together with ETA. So for the Cassandra Banks Foundation, diversity, equity, access, and inclusion are foundational principles which are central to our mission as we focus on creating a more inclusive future where workforces are more diverse, economic power is distributed equitably, say that 2 times fast, and philanthropy is in alignment with the needs of communities of color as defined by the people themselves.
There you go.
I like access the more I'm thinking about it, because access feels actionable. I'm granting access, I'm giving access, I'm making this, and I think that's one of the things that we're hearing whenever you research or listen to webinars or attend any kind of conference on DE&I or DEAI, you're going to see that it's like, okay, we've done a lot of talking over the past year or so. We've talked about social injustice. We've all been raged. We've made our posts on social media, but we can't stop. That's what gets us going. Now we've got to put the feet to it. And so that access to me is really a huge part of that. And I guess speaking of action.
It's an action word. It's an action word. Well, I'll take it to mean as far as action.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right as far as we can build all the DE and I components we want, but giving access is not equitable.
Right.
Pure and simple. So I like the access word being used.
Yeah, it's got to be the verb. We've got to see what's doing. And speaking of doing, you all, amazingly, it's incredible what you've done just in such a short period of time that we've worked together. But you did some focus groups with Black women. This was back in August of 2021. And I wanted to see if you could tell us, Drew, I'll come to you, but I know others may want to, add into this, but can you give us kind of a high level? We don't want to do anything to break confidentiality. I know there was some, we really worked to make sure everyone felt comfortable with what they were able to share, but maybe a high level look on what you found out from those groups.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to share. Yeah, we were really excited about the focus groups back in August. We got some great representation from women from across the country with kind of all different levels of experience, from some who had just been in apprenticeship for less than a year to some who had been in for 8 to 10 years and journeyed out. All of the women we spoke to were Black women, but we really do believe that a lot of the insights that came out of the focus groups apply to not just Black women. They apply to other historically excluded groups such as women, other people of color, people with disabilities, and we've already talked about how including those groups is just creates a better workforce for all. So we had 3 kind of main takeaways that came out of the focus groups that we wanted to talk about today. One was that we were just talking about this in terms of access. There's an information gap currently. Not a lot of people know about opportunities in apprenticeship, except those with family and friends in the industry. So there's definitely an opportunity to reach out to more diverse audiences to let people know about these kinds of opportunities and the path that can create for your family. Second key takeaway that we heard from the women we spoke to was that job sites are challenging environments for Black women. I don't want to go into specific stories. We mentioned the confidentiality, but we heard very candidly about Black women's experiences with racial and sexual discrimination on job sites. So we think that there's an opportunity to work with contractors and across all of the organizations that kind of take place in this space to take a closer look at the environments that we're recruiting women and people of color into, and look at best practices for creating safe environments for all people that are on the job site, including Black women. I think it's important to call out here that while Black women are potentially more likely to be targeted on job sites because of the color of their skin, they're definitely not the only ones that are affected by sexual discrimination on the job site. I think one of the things that I think about is, that could be my sister, that could be my mother, my aunt, my niece. The environment that we're placing people into affects all different kinds of people. So just connecting that empathetically. Last thing on this one is just around, there's one quote that I'll read that I thought was really powerful. So it's a quote from one of the women in our focus groups. They're fighting to the death to make sure that we don't make a living. I think about this as a woman who does not need a husband, as a woman who is making as much money as a 2-income household. That's what they're fighting against, our independence. Thought that was really powerful, and that just kind of changed my lens a little bit on some of the discrimination that might be experienced by some women in these workplaces. And then the third point is just around, we heard again and again the importance of mentorship and network building for these women. A lot of Black women are the only Black women on their job sites and the only Black women that they come across. So creating opportunities for Black women to connect with one another. But also we heard a lot of stories about Black women who had white women mentors as well, just like making those connections to make sure that Black women have the support networks that they need to really succeed on the job sites. Those were really the main takeaways that we came away with. And we're just really excited about the opportunity to work alongside ETA IBW and NECA to kind of build on the DEI work that y'all are already doing to try to fill some of these gaps.
Yeah, there was so much, and we've obviously communicated about the results of your focus group with, again, being very mindful of confidentiality, because you all created such a safe space, and that's one thing we won't wreck. Like, we're not coming in to disrupt that. But anybody that's ever probably heard me talk has heard me talk about intent versus impact. So whatever our intention is, what is the impact of said words and actions? And as you communicate from what you've learned is it may not be our intention, and by our, I mean the electrical industry, it may not be the intention to make a woman or to make a Black woman feel that way, but the point is it's happening. And so what can we do to change that? And I think that's where the responsibility comes in. It's kind of like, you can't tell me you didn't hurt my feelings. You may not have wanted to hurt my feelings, but you did. And so I think, taking ownership and responsibility for what we can do and how we can change it.
To have the quote given is what we need to look at, not the fact that it was having to be made. So
Absolutely.
I agree. The impact is what's most important.
And just for more for our listeners, just this mentorship and connection, networking. I mean, that's something Todd and I think over the past, I don't even know how long, have been talking about. And you're going to start seeing more and more about that, ways to connect. We've been working on that with training directors, connecting with each other, and instructors and apprentices, and certainly when it comes to DE&I, ways to connect and make sure people don't feel alone and they can share successes and struggles to support each other. So. Absolutely. Brennan, I got a question for you. This is certainly, it's a new endeavor, and yet I can see the benefits of it lasting and being so far reaching. What do you envision the impact of CBF being?
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. I think that's a great question, and you're right. It's really the intent versus the impact, and for us, it's all about the impact. The three of us collectively have decades of experience with humanitarian programs, nonprofit work, as well as philanthropic activities. And for us, the Cassandra Banks Foundation, we want to capitalize on our extensive experience and unique angle, on the private sector and specific trades to help them with diversity, equity, access, and inclusion. And we want to make sure that these are fundamental principles for some of these key sectors in the trade and private sector as a whole. And this really, the diversity, equity, access, and inclusion is central to our mission. We're focused on creating a more inclusive future where workforces, including the electrical trade, are more diverse at the end of the day. Furthermore, we want to, as I've noted, is to provide economic power to communities and individuals that might have felt left out. We want to make sure that economic power is distributed equitably, across our communities here in America, and also, ensure that philanthropy is in alignment with the needs of communities of color, as defined by communities of color. And I'll just add that as someone that has worked in philanthropy for many years, both with high wealth individuals, national foundations, and so forth, philanthropy itself is also a field that needs to be diverse. And philanthropy as a whole is still, overwhelmingly led by some of our white brothers and sisters who are doing great work to support communities of color, but it's hard to do so when you don't have the representation from communities of color, especially in terms of decision making and where the funding goes. And in addition to that, quite often, I know some of you have heard this sort of analogy. I compare it to Reagan's trickle-down economics of the 80s, whether you believe in it or not. But in terms of philanthropy, there's still this trickle-down approach where they feel their support to communities of color can be obtained or achieved by still supporting organizations and rewarding grants to organizations that are still overwhelmingly white or lacking representation from communities of color, but that their work, as middlemen, if I may, trickles down, that the dollars will eventually trickle down to communities of color through advocacy campaigns or through research and think tank work. But the reality is at the end of the day, those communities of color that are trying to be targeted by philanthropy end up receiving pennies on the dollar, in terms of those grant dollars. And, so part of our mission, to conclude, is also to change philanthropy. And our vision is a foundation that is led by Black women, both in terms of board and staff, and that decisions are made by the women from these communities that we want to target, and really put the power of the decisions, the programs, the activities, the interventions firmly in the hands of women of color. And then we think that's really important. So as we focus on working with specific trade groups and specific sectors, at the same time, we want to also change philanthropy and provide a different approach for philanthropy to ensure that their dollars are reaching communities of color in a more effective and more efficient manner.
So that's a huge point to me, is when, if I'm doing the work for or supporting something, it has to be for those and supporting those that it's meant to be. So I use this example, but I have a friend whose son is autistic. If I'm not hearing from her, if she's not telling me what she needs, what it's like, if I'm not centering it on that, I can go out and tell you all day what to do for parents of autistic children, but I have no clue from a personal standpoint. So I've got to inquire. I've got to put the parents who have the autistic child, if you will, on the board, right? They've got to have the seat. They've got to have the mic, and I sit back and I support it. And I think that's, a beautiful thing to make sure we recognize. So 5 years from now, Brennan, where are you? Where's CBF?
Well, I think, there's a few specific goals that we have over the next few years. First, we want to expand on our partnerships with unions, trades, and other like-minded organizations that support Black women and larger communities of color as a whole. And I just really want to pause and really thank the Electrical Training Alliance, IBW, NECA, and the newly established Joint Task Force in the electrical industry as one of our key partners, as we move forward with our mission and our goals. But we look forward to being an organization that's able to also support other private sector and other trades, because electrical trade is one opportunity, but there are other trades that are still overwhelmingly dominated by white males, and we'd like to see more faces from communities of color in those fields. Second, I mentioned earlier how mentorship is so important for women and persons of color in the apprenticeship programs. Quite often they're sitting in classrooms or on work sites where there's not one person that looks like them. It's important that they have a mentor that could provide them with the additional support, encouragement, words of advice to ensure that they can successfully complete these apprenticeship programs, which could last over the course of 3, 4, 5 years. So a key pillar for the Cassandra Banks Foundation is to ensure that every apprenticeship participant that we support, that we engage with, we partner them with a specific mentor, someone that will be available to them, for them, to help again provide the encouragement, the motivation, words of advice, wisdom, and their shared experience to ensure that they have a higher likelihood of completing the apprenticeship program. Thirdly, it's tied to that mentorship piece, which is to ensure that we can retain Black women and other individuals from communities of color in the apprenticeship programs. And connected to that, it starts with the recruitment. And it goes back to that access information and ensuring that more Black women have access to the program, which starts with the recruitment. It starts with the awareness and going out to communities of color, working with other nonprofits that are already working with communities of color, specifically Black women, and ensuring that these women have the information they need about apprenticeship programs and helping to recruit a more diverse participation in the apprenticeship programs. And then fourth, all this leads to, as I highlighted earlier, creating a more diverse workforce that in turn helps to change the culture in the trades, the culture at the work site to be more inclusive and more welcoming for all workers. And I'll end by also adding that, there's certain issues and challenges on a work site or at the workplace that are closely linked to our society, and we can't change society. So we can't change every workplace or work site, and I think when we talk about diversity, equity, access, and inclusion, it starts with training, to train managers and supervisors so that they are more mindful about how they engage their workforce and ensure that there's a healthy, safe environment for all of their colleagues on the workforce. But at the same time, we have to change the faces within that workforce. And I strongly feel that, it's a two-pronged approach, but over the course of time, a more effective way of creating a more diverse and more inclusive workplace and working environment is just to change the faces, at the work site, so that if as an African American male, if I walk into a work site, that I can see they're African American males. The same thing for a Black woman, same thing for a Latina, same thing for a woman, period. To not be the only woman on the job site. So I think the greatest opportunity that we have in front of us for the foundation, for the Electrical Training Alliance and other apprenticeships is ensuring that we're recruiting more diverse candidates to participate in the program and turn out these programs. And end result is that we have more diverse faces at the work site. And when you do that, that changes the culture.
Yeah, Brennan, you've echoed my comments several times made, and just what you're saying about increasing the workforce through diversity as well as the mentoring initiative you had. It's spot on. Our message has been that way for quite some time now, and it's good to hear that coming from you, from your experience and background, to see somebody believing the same thing. So I'm excited about what we can do here.
Yeah. And that seeing myself, whoever I am, right? Regardless of anything, any of my background, because it is that intersectionality. We're so much more than just one thing, but to be able to see myself somewhere, to see that this is possible, this is attainable, I'm not alone. I mean, that's, if you think about any kind of support group.
Well, the most powerful thing you can do with apprenticeship, outside the apprenticeship structure itself, is have somebody there to walk an apprentice through the process. That's what, what it is.
Right. I bring back another friend, but her daughter was diagnosed with cancer before she was a year old. And as much as I want to support her and others that are in her circle want to support, there's a different support that she gets from other families and other parents of their children having cancer, because we're there, or we've been there, or we are there. And so it's just different. So to be able to connect this experience, and now that's my experience together, it's a beautiful thing. And to me, it creates success just kind of naturally. Melanie, go ahead.
And I think it's important to point out, and we heard this in the focus groups too, that it's not that Black women want special treatment. It's like, we don't want specialness. It's more about just leveling that playing field and making it so that everyone can succeed. So I think that's just one part that, as we think about this, it's not about, so I want your audience to not hear it as, this is the special group and they deserve so much. It is about just being inclusive, bringing everyone to the table in a way that everyone succeeds.
And what's so interesting about that to me is we, outside of whatever the group, so we're going to say Black women, we're talking to you, right? I'm having to make all these efforts. I'm having to make all these changes. And it's like, but the problem is it's because of how things were and are. Like, you're actually just asking to treat a person respectfully, kindly, inclusively, equitably. But because, unfortunately, society has not done that to this point, the industry has not done that to this point, it feels special. And it's like, no, it shouldn't be.
That's what we should be doing anyway.
Right.
That's what we say, right? That's it.
Yeah. So for those that feel like, oh, this is such a change, well, it's a change that, should have been made a long time ago.
Things we
never
should
been
be doing
there.
already. That's
Exactly.
why I look at it, so.
Exactly. Melanie, I'm going to let you help close us out with, people may be listening and want to know, like, how do we find out more about the Cassandra Banks Foundation? Where do we even find them? So can you help us out with that?
Sure. We're at CassandraBanks.org is our website, and you can reach any of us with our first names at CassandraBanks.org. We're also, I will say, I've been a little slack on Twitter, but we are on Twitter also, Cass Banks, FDN. And we're just excited about this opportunity. Thank you for your willingness to chat with us and hear about, all of our initiatives.
Melanie, Drew, Brennan, no, we say thank you to you. We thank you for participating with us.
Yes, huge thanks for what you're doing. Thanks for reaching out to us and letting us be a part of this. It truly is, I think, our privilege to help you. So thank you all so much.
Great.
So Todd, that was that was an incredible one. I love to connect with people that are passionate. We probably have said this over and over that there's so many in our industry that feel so strongly about what we do and who we are. And so, what did you think? Like, what's your say what moment from that?
What a story! What a story you have with Cassandra Banks and what she's able to accomplish in this industry. Back during a time where the access wasn't as easy as it is now, we talk about access, part of this there, and it's better today than it was in '79. But what a story she has to share and the example she can give to show apprentices today, young journeywomen today that are just starting in the industry, journey level workers of all areas of our industry. What a great story. I mean, I'm jealous of where she's got to work in some of the places. Go to South Pole to work. Wow. What a job. I mean, what an experience that is. And not just the location she has, but her, you think about a work ethic to get there. You have to have the work in our industry. You have to be willing to work to succeed and advance, and it's proven by what she's able to accomplish where she's at. So that's another story worth sharing, no matter being a black woman or not. That's anybody in our industry can work that long, that type of environment, those many locations. Now that's worth sharing. She's doing something right in that case, or whoever it is that would accomplish those same goals, that's doing something right. Yeah. Let's share that story. So.
I would agree. Yeah, echoing that. I think that's my kind of moment is just her story and how it's passing on, the next generation to her son and the work that he's doing in our industry. So basically, I feel like our industry is going to be better because Cassandra Banks walked into a JATC and applied.
Well, it is. It'll be better. And think about it, I always believe this selfishly, but I think I'm right. We have the best industry already, but think about how good we could be and what we can do and how we can grow and use the assets available to us and by the experiences of our individual members, this being one, and a great one to look and use and admire. Why not? Let's do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this, the continued work of the IBW, NECA, ETA Joint Task Force for DE&I. I mean, it's an incredible group of people that are completely committed to this. And that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much again to Brennan, Drew, and Melanie for all that they're doing and certainly for being with us. Big thanks always to you, the listeners, for taking time to join us. Remember that we want to hear from you. I'm not going to stop saying that if there's topics you want us to cover, don't forget to send me an email at saywhat@electricaltrainingalliance.org. Our next episode is going to be in March, which is Women's History Month. And we're going to be talking with some incredible women from our industry. Until then, stay connected with us through our newsletters, blog posts, follow us on social media, subscribe to this podcast, tell somebody about it, stay powered up, and we will see you next time.
Say what?